Hello, everybody. Welcome to Labour Black Socialists. And this conversation is going to be a continuation of our first video that we did in regards to the bill we're calling the Police Crackdown Bill. It's got a very longer name, and I'm sure the people in the room today will be discussing it in detail, but that's the easy way that I refer to it. So I'm just going to do a quick intro of who is in the room. Hello, everyone. Who's in the room? Introduce yourself.
Hi there, I'm Maurice McLeod from South London.
Amazing. Who else is in the room?
Ridwan from Bedfordshire.
Amazing.
Hi, I'm Lucy Scott, Hackney North.
Amazing. Who else is in the room?
Lukman Khan from Midland.
Fantastic. And we've got some Labour Black Socialists who are also listening in. Welcome, welcome to you all. And we're really excited to get this conversation started, to discuss, to bring our thoughts together, because democracy is at the heart of what makes this country great. And we, the people, have a voice. And today, this is a way for us to get together and exercise that voice and that right to have an opinion about the laws that our government is putting forward. So this is not a political rant. This is just our thoughts on what is going on, and for you, the listener, to kind of have a less jargon, like a political dramatic side, but a humanized version of what this bill actually means, the implications it has on our life and our society, and could we have any thoughts on it and any actions on it? So yeah. So the first question I have for the room is to understand what the purpose of the Black Socialist is. If someone's tuning in for the first time and they're like, who are these people? Maurice, how would you describe who we are and what our purpose is?
Yeah, so Labour Black Socialists is, at the moment, a fairly informal group of Black and Asian Labour Party members who came together originally as part of the democratic process, the process to look at the democratic structures of the party. A number of us were put in a room together, and we looked around and went, wow, this is such a rarity to have a Labour room that looks like this. And with the, I would say, disappointing sort of outcomes from BAME Labour, this is very much becoming a place where we come together, organise, talk about the issues that we're all facing in our various CLPs, and basically campaign to make Labour what it should be, which is an actively anti-racist party.
I love that, amazing. Lucy, you're in Hackney North, and as a female, why is this like a space important for women?
Well, I wasn't part of the original grouping that Maurice was talking about. I got more involved with this kind of grouping of, Black, Asian and other minority ethnicity members, particularly when it came to the BAME NEC election. So we kind of were getting together and people had been starting to communicate with each other. But for me personally, getting involved was very much about, like you say, being participating in democracy. I would say, as far as, being a female activist, it's not really something that I focus on. I just feel like this is a space of solidarity of Black members who, as Maurice is saying, have anti-racism at their heart. For me particularly, I went out and searched for that. When I joined the Labour Party, I very much wanted to be part of the Black structures, and just found wherever I looked that they either weren't functioning, or they were very dysfunctional, or very divided. So over a year or more, this group has kind of like come together, and we do have an affiliation as Labour Black Socialists, but also what I think is amazing is that we're very much a collective of activists that are very busy in our own right, and then we kind of come together, support each other, bounce off each other. So collectively we work together, but also individually when we go back out and disperse, we're also very active in our own right. And I think that it's really important to have that safe space where you do have that solidarity, you can get that support, and you're not always in a minority. And yeah, I'm around many strong Black sisters, but also, you know, I appreciate my male comrades, and you know, I've never had cause to feel oppressed as a female. So, you know, I would say Labour Black Socialists is very much about Black solidarity and self-organization.
Amazing, amazing. Thank you, Lucy. And just an open question to the room, because to me, the diversity of this group is one thing that I absolutely, you know, I respect, and I think is what makes it unique. So I just want to ask the other members of the room who are not specifically Black, how is this diversity carried out across the Labour Black Socialists?
Sorry to interrupt, just to say though, Ifra, when we picked our name, Black was very much a political Black. So, you know, as an African or African descent, you know, obviously I fall into the category of Black, but for me, the understanding of what Black means in Labour Black Socialists is very much encompassing all of us as politically Black, affected by, you know, the scourge of white supremacy. So there is that unity amongst us. Sorry if anyone else wanted to speak.
Fantastic. Yeah, amazing. Before I move on, does anyone else want to add anything to that last point?
Yeah, I'd want to add, you know, we actually worked quite hard to talk to each other about what that definition should be. And it really did eventually revolved around the sort of as Lucy has alluded to, the sort of response to the colonialist experience. So peoples who have been seen as oppressed by, as you know, white supremacy, colonialism, imperialism, and so there is a kind of a sense of this is a space for non-white, non-European heritage, non-white European heritage activists, but trying to be quite kind of inclusive of as wide a variety, a range of peoples as possible. We went as far as to identify, and we've got a statement that actually sets out the different range of peoples who we see as being included in our kind of collective, including those, say, from Gypsy, Roma, traveler backgrounds who see themselves as non-white, or Jewish backgrounds who see themselves as non-white, you know, native peoples in the Americas and in the Australian and New Zealand and Pacific Islander type territories, etc. So, but I think there's something else that's actually quite important, is that this is about people from every part of the UK in the Labour Party who've come together. So, you know, it's not just London. I think you know, we've got people from the Northwest, from the Northeast, from the Midlands, from the Southwest. People from every part of the country are actually in the group, and there's more than 100 of us, and it's a growing group.
Amazing. And at the end of this video, we will tell you how you can reach out and be part of the movement, because it's really, really important. So I want us to kind of start navigating towards the main discussion for today, which is to talk about this police crackdown bill, like I said. But can anyone tell the listeners what's the official way that we should be referring to this instead of my colloquial, simple way?
It's the, let me see if I can get this right, the Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Bill.
Amazing, thank you very much. And my next question was, how do we summarize this in a way that the average myself person can understand it without all the political jargon? What does it actually mean?
I can have a go. I'm trying not to yeah. So I mean, sorry, Lucy. Go on. I didn't mean to jump in.
Sorry, I didn't mean for my mumbling to be that loud. Sorry. No, I was just, the first thing that came to my head was an erosion of our civil liberties, a disproportionate reaction and response that doesn't cover the things that need to be covered. That would be my brief summary, but I'll let you speak more of the jargon, Maurice. Sorry.
Oh, thanks. I'm the jargon buster, am I? So there are lots of parts to it, but the bits that are particularly worrying, the bits that are making the headlines are one, what it's suggesting for Gypsy, Roma, traveller communities is really chilling. It's basically making for a portion of that community making their way of life actually illegal. So that's really worrying. And I think that with all of these measures, I think there's a political game that's gone on, which is like, we can get away with this. We can get away. This is the government thing. We can get away with attacking this community because we don't feel like they've got enough support. The other parts are that, as Lucy alluded to, it doesn't really do or say anything about the issue that everyone's talking about, which is violence to women and girls. I think it was a strong line of attack that David Lammy and even Keir Starmer has been using, that this bill brings in 10-year sentences for damaging statues. So statues are actually now more protected in some cases than women who've been raped, which is absolutely ridiculous for a government that claims to be law and order and we're here fighting for safety on the streets and what have you. And sorry, I know I'm going on, but it's very much part. This isn't. We shouldn't look at this bill on its own. It's part of a whole swathe of things that are coming in to basically massively impact our ability to engage in society. There's talk of voter ID registration, which we know will suppress BME votes. We know it will. It happens in America, and we're trying the same thing over here. Then they're going to try and stop protests. So one of the things that this bill says is that it talks about demonstrations causing a nuisance. That's kind of the point. If a demonstration doesn't bother anybody, it will be ignored. So it talks about demonstrations making a nuisance, and put some of the power with the authorities, with the police or the courts, to sort of say, yes, we think this is legitimate. This is something you're allowed to protest about. This is something you're not allowed to protest about. Article 11 of the Human Rights Act says we all have that right. We all have the right to come together and say, with people that agree with us, and say, this is wrong with my country, this needs to change. That right isn't caveated on if the police agree or if the government thinks that it's a reasonable thing for you to protest about. So it's going to have a much bigger effect, I think. I think some people, it's obvious that, people that are involved in Black Lives Matter and people that are involved in Extinction Rebellion can tell straight away that this is going to have a massive negative impact. But I think there's all sorts of other groups who haven't quite realized how bad it's going to be.
Thank you so much. And as you were talking now, I was just trying to write down as much as I can on my phone, so I can keep updated with people who are listening in from WhatsApp, but they can't be here, but they're just let us know what's happening. So I was just yay. So I was just looking at a comment that someone just made now, and it's just saying that the state has an obligation to facilitate protest in terms of safety, but not to dictate how people should protest. And there was also a social media post made by a comedian that said, if you're protesting and the person you're protesting against likes how you're protesting, then it defeats the purpose of it being a protest. So I just wanted to know the room's thoughts on that, the fact that, is this basically essentially saying, we're supposed to hold hands in kumbaya when things go wrong, and we're not supposed to have an opinion, basically. That's essentially what social media is saying, that this bill is trying to stop us from, making the system uncomfortable when things go wrong.
Could I come in here, please?
Yeah.
I have fundamental problems with this bill. Firstly, in terms of what it does to the concept of democracy as a fragile experiment by flawed individuals like ourselves. And secondly, the details of the bill. As a democracy, there are two things that are important. The right to isegoria.
And
That
the right to
means
play your prayer thing. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
the right to isegoria. 500 years before the Common Era, where Athenian citizens had the right to speak their mind on things that matter and raise those issues in the public domain. We cannot talk about the oldest democracy or the House of Commons, what is a democratic debate being the House of Commons, without going to Athens. And in Athens, where they claim their legitimacy in this House of Commons, 500 years before Christ, citizens had the right to speak their mind about matters which affected ordinary people. That is isegoria. And the second one is parrhesia, which is speaking truth. Your truth. Truth is not when the elites in our society sit down in hallowed chambers and debate amongst ourselves how flat the earth is. Truth, especially the truth of people on the receiving end of power, those people ought to have the right to speak those truths. That's without those two rights, those people in the House of Commons who just passed this dreadful law should be ashamed of themselves, calling themselves Democrats, reaching out to the history of Athens.
Thank you, thank you. Can I just play devil's advocate for a second? As passionate as that was, what if someone were to say, we're just being a bit exaggerated. This is just putting rule of law and order. And when people protest, they destroy buildings and they cause damages. And what this bill is trying to do is just bring structural order into actions. And secondly, we're in a pandemic and people should not be protesting and gathering together in large groups because we're trying to contain the virus. So what would you say to those two arguments? Because that's what the alternative are saying.
I think that normally people in power, they look at the caricature of people whom they wish to target, whip that up into a cream in a populist way, get massive support because everyone is prepared to shut down the stereotype. And then when those dreadful laws are passed, then people find that the details actually apply to everyone. The genesis of this dreadful bill was the Extinction Rebellion in 2019. Yes, there were roads that were closed and bridges that were occupied, and life became a bit uncomfortable for many. And sometimes one needs to say, maybe, but I come from the generation that celebrates Seattle. And we don't make excuses for that. And I come from a tradition of the anti-apartheid struggle. And if we need to overthrow governments, we don't make excuses for that. Unjust laws must be opposed. In this case, the issue here is people use the discomfort of the Extinction Rebellion and the drama that was caused without looking at the details of the argument of the people who advanced Extinction Rebellion. That is a worse disaster. But in this case, they're not trying to keep the roads open. The police can tell you when to start to protest and when to stop protesting. If you want to sing or if you want to use a megaphone, the police can tell you, take it down a notch or three. And if you don't, they can take you out and then they can arrest you. The police, you don't even have to be a crowd. You have to be. There was an anti-war protester sitting at Parliament year in and year out, a lone protester. In terms of this law, the police can say that this single person poses a threat to public order. And if this person does not move on, this person can be arrested. Now, some might say, yes, but we need to try and test these things, see how it works. The police have used a tactic called kettling, where they take protesters and corner them off in very, very hostile ways to determine whether or not that was the police tactic is proportionate. Under the circumstances, it didn't take a high court interdict to do this. It took 11 years through the courts. By then, it was a different country already. And the same dreadful laws just become worse. So the issue is people need to be careful. Bad laws must be opposed. Unlike the current Labour Party leadership that sits on the fence and says, which way is the wind going to blow this weekend? And then they find their courage and then they become the official, Her Majesty's official opposition. But the Friday before, they sit down and they say, we're going to abstain because our indications from our target constituencies is that we should abstain. What is this? Where is moral courage and moral consistency? This is a bad law. The first thing people need to do is maximize the space for dissent and minimize the powers of the coercive instruments of the state. That is the first thing. Without that in a democracy, you fail.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just want to bring in other voices to see. That's really, really passionate. Lucy and Maurice, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that point, on saying that it's not as dramatic, draconian, backwards, horrible as, you know, the bill is sounding, that there might be some positive in there as well to bring law and order into how we're living. Because really and truly, can the government make a law that is as dark as we're thinking this bill to be? I'm really curious to know your thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, I think the current government has got a majority and they know that they can pass these things. I also think that this government is very much the product of what the Thatcher government put in place. So the implementation of the Conservative government in 1979, they basically ran riot within the state institutions, used them to, you know, create their power base, and have now secured their ability to monopolize them. And that very much is our democracy being undermined. And this is about them securing their ability to do that. It's also, you know, when you hear people like Priti Patel or whoever talking about the Extinction Rebellion protest and how much that was an assault on democracy, like I have never heard anything so hypocritical in all my life. And I think that, you know, the Tories are really building on this discourse, this narrative that the media clearly, you know, enables them to paint, supports it, you know, and we are at a point right now where basically they are trying to shut down our ability to call them to account. I've never in my 50 years witnessed such incompetence in government as we have seen over the last year or so. It's just been lurching from pillar to post, and as a teacher, you know, that's been very, very clear. We have to remember that in the 19, that's how old I am, sorry. In the 2017 election, Theresa May was clear and adamant in a group of Conservatives how she would, if we have to rip up the Human Rights Act, we will. And the whole crowd cheered joyously. And this is part of, you know, that assault on our human rights. I think this is a power grab. It's so subjective. You know, if it's about discretion, are the police really gonna have the reparations march on Emancipation Day going through central London? You know, like the 2nd of March was the 40th anniversary of Black People's Day of Action, where we had over 20,000 Black people from across the country marching in peaceful protest that was attacked by the police, that was lied about by the media. We're still living in the aftermath of the lies in the media from that day that led to the Brixton uprisings. We've got like the next generation of the Conservative government that, you know, pushed out Operation Swamp 81, that brutalized and violated communities, that is quite happy to support the denigration of vilification of asylum seekers, refugees. You know, like the media is like the media is like 3 times more focused on vilifying refugees and, you know, people from minorities than any other newspaper. There's a really good Tiski Sawa where they're looking at all of that data. And so right now we are in the midst of, you know, a reaction to Black Lives Matter, trying to dig down and stay in denial. You know, the fundamental issues here are democracy, the climate, and tackling racism. And it's like this bill just underlines the fact that this Conservative government is determined to ignore those things and to disempower us from being able to actually raise our voices and bring these protests, you know, to the public. So, you know, the media needs to be part of this as well, because they're very much complicit in that. But overall, this is just another indication of how corrupt our democratic system is and how the Conservative government is willing to do whatever it can to secure its power base at the expense of our human rights.
Thank you, Lucy. I just want to bring in Labour Black Socialists, our voices in the back, just to add your thoughts to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's already been alluded to by what the other speakers have said, but, you know, there's already sufficient legislation in place for the police to do the things they need to do in terms of, you know, protecting the public, shall we say, if any kind of assembly were to get out of hand in any way. This is really unnecessary legislation. It's bringing in powers that could act as the thin end of a wedge, effectively. It can be presented as if it's all about making it easier for the police to protect people and property, and yet it can be very easily used in a kind of manipulative way to make political decisions about who should and shouldn't be assembling and protesting. I think there's something else here. Well, first of all, in terms of protecting the public, protecting people, protecting public property and even private property. There's already legislation that means that if somebody is at a protest and threatens, puts people under threat, or actually does physically harm people or property, that they can be dealt with by the law. But there is something really pernicious here, and that's that there are specific communities who are seeing this legislation coming in. And I'm alluding now to the Gypsy, Roma, traveler communities again. And they've been absolutely aghast at what they perceive as a license to suppress their entire way of life and culture, at least that part of their communities that are still travelers, still nomadic, and so forth, that they've absolutely seen this is going to be about the police turning up at a site where people are living temporarily and saying, you should not be here. We're taking your caravans, your homes, and if you protest, we're going to arrest you and throw you in jail. And we can hold over your head the possibility of a 10-year prison sentence. At its very worst, your children can be taken away from you and put into care. They're seeing this very much as you're bringing in this legislation to attack our way of life, destroy our culture, and that's something we should be really worried about. In the 1930s, in Europe, across Europe, and not only in the UK as well, there was the rise of fascistic movements. Some of them became governments, and they brought in laws like this, and we know what happened there. So I'm not saying, oh my God, this is exactly what will happen in the UK, but it's a really slippery slope if we don't oppose this, and it's law that shouldn't be there.
Thank you very much. I just wrote down the last comment that you said, like, we're not saying we're there yet, but it's that slippery slope, because every historical thing that's happened started small and then it escalated into something grand, and it caused catastrophes for many countries. And the irony is we're from the country that goes out to liberate some of the countries that are having democratic issues. And for us to be having a conversation where the citizens are saying our democratic rights are in danger here, that's concerning. And for me, that's why this conversation is very important, because it's very easy to be scrolling through social media, to be seeing dramatic speeches by politicians, as well as like all of these political pundits and other people just adding thoughts and thoughts and thoughts. But we need to have an actual conversation to break down what this bill means for our life. And hopefully the powers that be are able to see this later on and listen to the voices of the people as we're discussing things. As I said at the beginning of this recording, we're not here to have a political rant. We're here to have an informed discussion. And so on that note, I just want to bring in other voices before I ask another question, just on that last point on, is there any positive to this bill at all? Or are we on the same boat that we should be concerned? I want to do like a teacher mode and pick hands up in the air.
I don't see any positives.
Okay.
To me, the most important part, apart from the gypsy and travellers issue, is the right to protest. Of course, that this affects the ethnic minorities communities in terms of Black and Asians and Muslims and any other minorities really. The only thing that the people who are actually treated unjustly, and that could be even white people in poverty, when they're treated unjustly, the only thing they can actually do is to protest in order to show that they are actually dissatisfied with what is happening. If anybody takes their right to protest away, the amount of frustration that can actually build and build and then turns into things that the government wouldn't want, which is often the case, which when you actually stop people from doing things, they take it underground. To me, this is actually politically motivated, because apart from occasionally when the farmers protest, I can't think of any single instance where Tories actually go out and protest. They just don't. People who actually protest are usually seeking change, and change usually on the street. And the very nature of the Tory politics is they actually do things steady as she goes. And therefore, they don't actually come out on the streets for anything. So to me, this is actually politically motivated, because the only thing that's going to stop is those people who generally don't actually vote Tory. And also, the actual way the legislation is going is going to be subjective. I see people making comments about on social media that in the future, after this law is passed, to actually protest, you're going to have to seek the permission of the Home Secretary first. Well, that brings in a whole load of subjectivity, because you can then have protests which the government don't mind taking place, and others like Extinction Rebellion or Black Lives Matter, which they actually dislike from the word go. So there's going to be discretion used about who can actually protest and who can't. And that actually will then add into more injustice and discrimination against the very people who wants to come out on the street and demonstrate. So I actually don't see any positives in this at all. What I actually do see is a Labour Party who's supposed to be the party who actually fights for freedom, individual freedom, has almost gave this Tory government a green light up to the 2 days before the debate began in Parliament about this legislation. They gave them a green light, knowing that the Labour weren't going to oppose it. And they got to this position under that sort of situation. And now Labour chasing votes have noticed that actually these women protesters, what actually happened to them the other day, there might be some votes in it. So cynically, they've actually, through hypocrisy, have actually come to the position. But had they made it clear right from the beginning that they were going to oppose it, that would have given more confidence to actually the leftists, if you like, the socialists and so on, to actually be even more vocal than they have been. So I don't see any positive. All I can see is the poll tax issue here again. The legislation will be passed because the Tories have got the majority. After the legislation is passed, like it was in the poll tax, there will continue to be a resistance to this legislation. And a time will come when it will have to be repealed. But I don't understand why it needs to go in the first place, because it really will badly affect people like Black Lives Matter and people like us who actually are seeking change, not getting it. And the only way we can actually then show it is through protest. And if that's going to be taken away, I see dark future ahead.
Thank you very much. Oh, I'm hoping that dark future won't come. I was just writing down notes as Lukman was just talking, and I would like to know the room's thoughts on some of these things. The fact that people go out to protest, I really like that. People go out to protest because they're seeking change. There is an issue, there is a problem, and that's the purpose of why people go out to protest anyway. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need to, but the fact that, you know, when things go wrong, the street is where people gather, you know, to protest. And this bill is kind of, as Lukman said towards the end, is going to give the police a discretion on the types of protests that they're okay with and the type of protest that they're not okay with. That's my understanding anyway from what I was writing down. And because one of the key words that it's on the bill, I saw the word annoyance in there, like as if the police finds the particular protest or whatever the people are doing annoyance, then that could be a citing that they can say that, you know, that's not okay. And I'm mindful of the fact that this is beyond party kind of alliance, kind of line, party lines and things. It's something that affects everybody. And our, you know, whatever party that you support, if you're somebody who has a voice and somebody who looks at the world around you and would like to have an opinion, then this bill affects you, but it affects certain communities more than others because it's got their names clearly outlined in there. And so I'm thinking of the BLM march that we've seen compared to the far right marches that we've seen. I don't know if the room remembers, but 15,000 far right protesters walked through the streets of London with Nazi salutes and saying really hateful things, and they were allowed to freely do that. And even after, when the statues, you know, protest as well as the opposition, the other side, all of that was happening, the far right protesters were attacking the police. There was image of this a black man carrying one of the protesters to safety because they were just causing so much hassle amongst themselves. So are we saying that we want to live in a society where if the police are okay with that group to freely go and use their public, you know, freedom of expression and freedom of speech to speak, but other people, especially the women, in like, you know, at the vigil where the police came, instead of there for security, the women were arrested because they were there to, you know, be in solidarity and have a moment to reflect on the death of a woman killed by a police officer. So I'm really interested to know the room's thoughts on these things, because yes, society can say, you're all being extra. The police is not going to do all this to us. The law is not here to get us. This is just rule of law and simplicity. But why should we be concerned about these things, Maurice?
Why should we be concerned about this bill in particular, or well, for
just
all the
the fact that all of these things, yeah.
For all the reasons that have been said already, it's obviously going to stifle our rights. I think there's a bit more to it than that, though. I think that, yeah, of course, the government would like to stifle rights. For one thing, I bet you if you asked many senior police, they don't want the political burden of having to decide what is legitimate and what isn't legitimate. I bet you a lot of even the police that were down in Clapham, it's because they were commanded to go and close down that vigil. I bet you deep down, I mean, some of them might enjoy it, but I bet you deep down, most of them wouldn't have wanted to go and do that. So I think it's important to not think, oh, the police are grabbing power. No, they're having politics forced upon them so that the government can deny that it's acting politically. Oh, it's not us, it's the police. The police say that was dangerous. So there's a trick going on there. And the other trick is that you know, the government's not stupid. It knows that this bill is going to cause consternation among groups like us. And what it's really saying to its supporters is, we're on your side. We're not, you know, those lot are out there protesting and they look scary, and we're not them. We're on the other side to that. So it's about their battle for the narrative. It's about their battle to say, you know, we're the party of law and order and everything's okay. They're the boo. They're those lot. They're the rabble rousers. And it's, you know, of course we're going to make noise though. So we can't not make noise about this ridiculous bill. But I feel like they've miscalculated, because it's not just, you know, a few anti-racists. It's not just you know, a few sort of climate activists. You know, we're hearing even Theresa May of all people was speaking out against this bill. So I feel like the government's biggest challenge or biggest threat to them is Boris Johnson's hubris, and he's gone into this thing. Oh, I'm going to make this big grand thing. I'm going to show them who's in charge. But I think he's overreached, and it's been proven that this government, is quite happy to go backwards if it feels it needs to. And I feel with enough noise and with enough, got a picture of Fred Hampton behind me with the Rainbow Coalition of people that will be affected by this ridiculous law. I hope that is enough pressure to make them turn around.
Thank you. Before I bring in other thoughts, I just want to recap the notes that I've written down so far, because it's very important that we summarize what the purpose of some of the key things that we hope this conversation is passing on to those who are listening. So please feel free, speakers, to add anything that I missed out. So it says here, the notes that I've written down, the government's dangerous new policing bill is setting us backwards. It will give police more powers to shut down protests, stop and search without suspicion, and criminalize Gypsy and traveller communities. Is that summary enough? Thumbs up?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to carry on. Why is this bill problematic? So based on the discussions of what we've said and some other bits, feel free to add again. So the fancy terminology basically aims to stop us from protesting the way we want and follow the directions of how the police deems it right. This is problematic because the right to protest isn't a gift from the state. It is our fundamental human right under human rights law. And as Marie said, that's under Article 11, which gives us that privilege, right? States have an obligation to facilitate our protests for security purposes, to ensure that rule of law and order and things are all right and no damages to property and, everything is not done. However, they cannot suppress it. We are a democratic country and we should have the right to question and gather when we see something wrong. Thumbs up. Am I okay so far?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this is exactly what the government's new police crime sentencing and courts bill would seek to prevent. I said the proper name. Not content with people having a voice by using the pandemic as an excuse. And this is the part that's not sitting well with people. The fact that the government's excuse is because of coronavirus, people should not be gathering in numbers and, to stop the spread of virus. But vaccines are going out, over 20 million, I think was the last count, and more are going out every day. And people are doing socially distanced protests as well. Right here in Hackney, we had several protests outside our town hall where, our councillors as well as various other leaders were part of it, and it was socially distanced. So people can follow the law if the law does not take away their rights to just express themselves. And just to finish on that, the government cannot be allowed to use the public health crisis as a cover to make emergency measures permanent. Its new policing bill is an all-out assault on our basic civil liberties. And so these are the key 3 areas that's the main problematic that we would like the conversation to focus on. Number 1, it gives police the choice on where, when, and how people can protest. Number 2, it will potentially criminalize the entire way of life of nomadic, gypsy, and traveller communities. And number 3, it will create new stop and search powers that is already problematic, and it will exacerbate discriminatory over policing of people of colour. So that was a lot of reading. What is everyone's thoughts on that is? By the way, these are amazing thoughts that we got from a campaign that you can support. And there is a petition from libertyhumanrights.org. We'll post it on the video when it goes out. And if you agree with the words on this, on the words that we're saying and this discussion, sign that petition. That is one way that you can get involved, and we'll explain that later on. But I just want to bring the room in for a second. What are your thoughts on the summary?
Could I just add something that is even more scary? we have been focusing on the powers that the police will have. That is bad enough to make this a bad bill. But in Clause 54, Section 4, Clause 55, Section 6, the Home Secretary is afforded powers to determine what the serious disruption of the activities of an organization which are carried out in the vicinity or serious disruption to the life of a community might mean in the Public Order Act, with little or no parliamentary oversight. This essentially says, if what the police already are empowered to do in this bill, if that is not sufficient, the secretary, the Home Secretary, will still have the prerogative, without oversight, without accountability to Parliament, without debate and scrutiny, to just make it up as she goes along. Now, this is a dangerous Home Secretary. There is an unquenched thirst to issue regulations. Now, how much more does the Labour Party need to be persuaded to move from abstain or a disposition to abstain towards actually, even if it is so late in the day, at least on the basis of moral consistency, take a stand. This is a bad law. This Home Secretary is taking power for which she herself will not be accountable. For God's sake, take a stand. Do your job. Be the official opposition. Tell the Home Secretary, you are wonderful, madam, but whatever you do in office in our name, you account to us.
Thank you. And I just want to bring in, I'm from Hackney, and I'm very proud to say that Diane Abbott, our Member of Parliament, has spoken very vocally about this bill from the get-go. We also have other members of Parliament, such as, please refresh my mind, there were quite a few
Clive Lewis,
who were very vocal. Thank you, and others as well. Exactly. So yeah, so please make sure you say their names if I missed anyone out.
I didn't watch all the debate, but the names, Belle Rivera has been very, very vocal. I know Dara Sultana spoke at the rally. Afsana Begum is always speaking up. She spoke up so well about the Spy Cops bill. Someone else said Clive Lewis. I would assume that Claudia would be calling that out. So yeah, that's some people. Can I speak? Or do you want to carry?
Sorry, yeah, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, the fact that at the beginning I made it very clear that we're not having a political rant, that we are pointing out something that's wrong, but we also want to acknowledge that yes, the opposition has a role to oppose laws that are, putting our civil liberties at risk, of course. And there might, yeah.
He spoke up about it.
Sorry, what was that, Lucy?
John McDonnell, I heard his contribution in the debate. The shadow Home Secretary, I'm not sure what his name is, but yeah, he was on point as well. So, sorry to cut you, because I understand that you're trying to have clarity about the fact that this is about our choice being restricted. It's about criminalizing a minority group. It's about there being much more stop and search. So you've got a minority group, the Gypsy Roma traveller community, that are being targeted. Yeah. Are you targeting fly tippers? I don't think so. But anyway, the point is, in a majority, if we think about the last year, we think about the disproportionate outcome of COVID and the fact that it was shown to be, but there was no real action taken. All of the things that contributed to it continue to occur. There's been plenty of opportunities for people to connect the dots, and they haven't done that. Yeah. So then we think about George Floyd being murdered in the street, the eruption of protest around the world, and then we look at the backlash that has received. And then we look at this legislation that has been brought to Parliament and what the reality of that will be. So first of all, we know that we've got a government that is corrupt, does think about its friends, isn't equipped well enough with the full experience of the range of people in society to be able to implement policy that actually is adequate. We know that there's a legacy. Again, I'm talking about the 40 years since the Black People's Day of Action. There was police brutalization going on way before that. We're coming up to the 40th anniversary of the Brixton riots. We had an advisor in Downing Street that was a eugenist. And I've been saying this for a long time. It's like they want a riot. They want to slam our backs against the wall and have a reason to criminalize Black people and other minorities. Yeah, but we are like the poster folk of minorities being oppressed, which if you've done your studies of capitalism and socialism, sociological perspectives, we all know that when there is a capitalist crisis and there's an economic downturn, it will always be people from minority communities that get targeted. We've had a legacy of a conservative government that has no qualms about instigating the institutions of the state to attack people. We've seen that through the immigration, we see that through the outcomes in health and education. And we have a Home Secretary who said every aspect of what institutional racism is without actually being able to admit that that is what it was. And this is the person that is going to be making these high-level decisions, sitting at the table with Cressida Dick, who doesn't seem to get the fact that 2 young Black women were murdered last summer. Their naked bodies were found. Your police force didn't even bother going to look for them. Their family had to find them themselves. And then not only did that happen after a legacy of, Doreen's experience after her son was murdered, not only has all of that happened, over decades in succession. It's not a new police force. It's the same one that has been doing all these things, that had Christopher Elder's body on ice for 10 years. Yeah, you've got a police force that is still refusing to acknowledge that they are institutional racist. When you've failed the families, you've paid no attention to these young Black women, the media in cahoots as they were with Hillsborough and with Orgreave. Yeah. And then you've got the police violating these Black women's bodies, and you still can't acknowledge that there's a problem. You've got the anniversary of the march being attacked. You've got the outcome of the police's brutality and their response. So how can you have confidence in legislation like this when we know there's a capitalist crisis? We know that there's benefit of dividing and ruling and causing chaos, and we know that at the heart of that there is that collusion, corruption. Why is Rupert Murdoch hanging out hardcore with Boris? Weren't we supposed to be having Coulson Part 2? Do you know what I'm saying? So when we think about democracy and the institutions and how things are actually supposed to work, and we look at it in a historical perspective, we are still on a journey fighting for democracy. You could go back to the 1600s, like the People's Parliament got seized back, the king got put back on the throne, the elite clubbed together, and then what did they do? They went in hard on slavery and have created this ecological climate mess. So the fact that you are now trying to restrict people, criminalize people, set things in place so that things can escalate and you can therefore criminalize people more, you know, like what is the ulterior motive here? And
Thank
so
you,
just
Lucy.
sorry, just to finish on a positive note, I just think that it is really fundamental that we realize our power, that we demand and that we do, you know, challenge, because we are the difference that we need to make. And if we do nothing, you know, we are doomed. But if we look back, it is people, it is action, it is, you know, marching that does make that difference. So, yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I am aware of time, so I've written down like few final summary that I would like us to kind of close on. But I see hands up on here. Is this legacy hands from before? Or are
No, I'd
these
like to
hands?
speak, sure.
Of course, yeah,
Uh,
please.
Yeah, I mean, actually, what Lucy's just said is the perfect point for me to pick up on, and it's the same thing I wanted to say, but actually, it is perfect. You know, when we look at this in terms of what should we be looking for in new legislation, and what is this legislation trying to do, and what does it connect with? Well, you know, we've just seen that the voices that are speaking up loudest at the moment are people, groups, representatives of groups, of communities who see that, well, you know, we're in the target zone up front, first in line. But where does the freedom of assembly come from? Now, we've talked about freedom of expression, freedom to speak your truth and express yourself, and that would be nothing, and this bill would not be as significant if it wasn't also setting out to limit how many people can gather to raise their voices. And where did that come from? Well, you know, Lucy's just alluded to what happened the last time that there was no king, no monarchy. There was a restoration that coincided with the period when slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, was made its most intense, and actually the modern world was built and financed on that. The industrialization of this country came on the back of having accumulated sufficient wealth from the slave economy that it could be poured into the country's industrialization and the transfer of people from an agrarian lifestyle into being workers in factories in their masses, treated very badly, who then agitated to say what was wrong with how they were living, agitated to be able to assemble, organize in trade unions, and they were suppressed. The laws of the time were worse than this, but those laws had to change. Those people were transported for life out of the country just for the temerity of gathering and talking about what's wrong with how we're being treated as workers. And their agitation, breaking the laws of the time, forced the laws to change, so that we eventually had entire legislation that actually safeguarded people's right to assemble. So this is like a kind of a throwback. It's trying to reintroduce some of those kind of limitations, and to say, well, we'll now throw you in jail for 10 years. Okay, we're not so uncivilized that we'll send you to Australia for the rest of your life, and nobody knows what your prospects are going to be when you get there, but we'll throw you in jail for 10 years. So, you know, that's a really significant denuding of basic rights that working people, it's not solely about marginalized communities, it's about the base of this country's you know, the people, working people who fought to secure those rights. And if we think in terms of what the future holds, the government knows that you know, we have entered into a crisis, it's an economic crisis. It's not just because of the pandemic. There's a climate crisis, which is going to make these kinds of things worse. The economy is going to be under stress. People's livelihoods are going to be under stress. People will start to feel like if the government and the settlement we have doesn't protect us, doesn't protect our livelihoods, what else do we have? We need to be able to assemble on the street, march somewhere, say, this isn't enough, we need more. And the government is looking at that and looking ahead and saying, oh, crikey, if only we had the legislation to stop any of this happening when it starts to happen. Yeah, we've seen Black Lives Matter, we've seen Extinction Rebellion, and what if we end up with tens of thousands of workers on the street because their work is precarious? And how do we stop that? How do we suppress it? We bring in this legislation. If anything, the legislation that we should be having is legislation that says these are precious rights, and police need to have regulations that ensure that they exercise their duties sensitively in respect for those rights. It should actually be, as one of our speakers said about the kettling methods that have come into use by the police. It should be more about saying that's just creating more tension in a situation like that and creating the possibility of more violent outcomes. Actually, it's the regulations we need that will prevent those kind of things being how the police operate when these situations arise. So that's what legislation should be doing, not doing the opposite, which is what this legislation is setting out to do.
Thank you very much. And again, I'm very wary of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read out the final notes here for us to reflect on. And if I could please be as strict as I can and say if we can have 1 to 2 minutes reaction or reflection on these so that we can try to conclude within a decent time. The point I have here is about violence against women and what this bill means in terms of that, but also the timing of when the bill is introduced, because we've just had a very, very serious, very disturbing case where a woman was kidnapped on her way walking home by somebody wearing a badge, and this bill has come at the time when we should be focusing on the protection of women to just walk home in the evening. And so do you think the time for us to be talking about giving more power and more plainclothes police in situations to protect women, when women are now in a place where they're actually fearing police? Should this be the conversation we're having, or should it be a different conversation when it comes to the relationship between women and police? And a minute each, if that's okay. I see Lukman's hand is up.
I think the thing is that to concentrate on a particular part of this legislation is actually dangerous. Whether it's to do with women or anything else, it's the broadness of this legislation that's an issue. And if anybody was to actually target a specific element of it, they're going to be missing it. It's the comprehensiveness of this legislation that's the problem. Also, it irritates me when people actually mention pandemic, because if it was anything to do with a pandemic, this would be a temporary legislation, not a permanent one. And then we wouldn't be having this discussion at all. It's because this is a permanent legislation. Actually, it's just been referred to. One of the things this will have a very large implication for is, traditionally in this country, when there is a big strike, big worker strikes, and the strikes are so big that the strikes get taken to London, where Parliament sits, irrespective whether the factory is in Liverpool or whether it's in Glasgow or whether it's in Southampton. If the strikes are big, they actually get to London, where Parliament is. What happens to that? Because this legislation actually, they're protests as well. Those strikes are protests. what happens to those, the worker strikes to do with the economy? I was in the, I'm sure that Lucy and Morris would have been. I was in the million people march for the Iraq War. A million of us on London Street. Now, that is a situation where the war was going for so long with so many deaths that it actually resulted in 1 million people ending up on London Street. Now, what happens in situations like that? I tell you what happens. It's not about how do they stop 1 million people, because those 1 million people only got there because there were organizers organizing it. What this legislation will do is actually cut the leadership. It won't even get to 1 million people turning up on the street because the organizers will be got to before it even gets there. So it's actually throttling a whole series of things. I mean, most of the major wars, including the Vietnam War, finally were brought to an end because people went out on the street. People organized it, went out on the street. This legislation actually won't be going after protesters. It will be going after the organizers before the protesters end up on the street. Protesters just don't turn up on the street on the day. It takes days and days and weeks to organize them. And the legislation will be going after those. It's really worrying that some of the biggest pressure points that the society has to deal with is usually sorted out on the street. And they will not be able to do it. And that will cause tremendous amount of frustration by people who care about other people. That's the human rights activists. And God knows what will actually happen if their frustration is so harsh that they can't actually go and take it out on the street. I mean, what happens? I mean, the other thing is the pots and pans that we were banging, that is a nuisance. What happens to that in the future for the nurses and stuff? I mean, it just goes on and on.
Did we lose someone?
I think we lost. Ifra. Have you lost? Yeah.
I'm back. Sorry, I had this is posting something on Zoom. Like you are absolutely fine and able to be in a conversation, but the moment you have a phone call, suddenly everything stops. But we'll get through it. Thank you, Lukman. Any last points on that? On the implications of what this means for violence against women? And before we move on to the next point, please try to be as brief as possible. Yes.
That is very hard for me, but I'll try. It is impossible to coercively create a safe environment for women by increasing police powers. What is needed is a different education system that trains people through the education system slowly about their place in the world, the way to relate to others. And that means an education system that is not dependent on testing people, but teaching them slowly so that women get a safe place to walk at any time of the day because of training of the imaginations of students when they are at school over a 12-year period, and if they are in higher education, as well as the kinds of training that used to be done, perhaps still but less so in trade union movements and in NGOs. It is training of people slowly over a long time that changes sense of who we are and our behaviors, that brings compliance from below to create a safe environment. Police, they cannot do anything. The only thing they can do is to knock us down.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I just wrote down really key things that you just said there. that instead of having more powers and laws that, you know, segregate the people and causes division in how we see things, we should be focusing on education system from men of all police and none, to give more empowerment and protection for women, so that the fact that a woman can walk home alone should just be a normal thing in society. It should not be a thing where some people on social media are saying, why was she walking home by herself? Why didn't she have anyone with her? That shouldn't be a conversation. This was a grown adult woman who was wearing visible clothing. She messaged someone to let them know what time, where she was, followed all the protocols, but she just, you know, was in a society where she wasn't safe as a woman. So that should be the focus. How could we be creating a street that is safe for women to walk home, instead of talking about this law and that thing that causes more further confusion and segregation for people? Right. Okay. So
sorry, Ifra, I was trying to wait till last. I don't know if Maurice had anything to say. I did want to say something if I can.
Yeah. Okay.
But I
Go
will.
for it.
Did you want to speak, Maurice? No, I wanted to go last after before Ifra, so that like you could have a female voice to kind of finish it up.
Yeah,
Okay.
you go, Lucy. Go, Lucy.
Eddie, got nothing to say there, Maurice?
I've always got lots to say, but I've spoken loads, so it's fine.
Okay, all right. Hold on. Look, now I forgot to go back on my phone. I really agree with what Ridwan just said. You know, I'm a teacher, and I've had 3 children, and you know, I'm human, and I care about humanity, and it's disturbing to see that, you know, someone who's been around for 15 years is happy to kill another human being, someone else's baby, like you know, one of their peers. It is absolutely shocking, and it's indicative of the society that we're living in. You know, and like, you know, I like going back in time, but you know, if you think about what has happened in the last 500 years and where we're at today, you know, there's a massive climate disaster, but also it feels to me like capitalism has commodified humanity in the pursuit of profit. So violence against women, you know, although this is something that has always been around, you know, at the same time there's always been strong women. You know, like if we look at the kind of new world, the Western world, you know, women have been through their own struggle. And if you think about how we are violated and what did actually occur, that is a standard abuse of human power, you know, over over women, because they're not necessarily the weaker sex. But I think also as well, we have to think about how in society our trust has been violated, our trust in politicians, our trust in the police, our trust in newspapers, our trust in people that should be in positions of trust, you know, and like we are living in a world that is very much driven by the pursuit of profit, that is male dominated. So, you know, sex does sell. And if we look at where we're at today, like porn has exploded. You know, like if we look at the last 20 years, and then if we also look at the way that, you know, the ideological struggle, that hasn't been that ideological struggle putting capitalism in check like there was for decades, you know, and seeing the documentaries on, you know, Fidel and the impact that that movement was having, it's like, you know, like that element has gone, and things have, you know, have got run away with themselves. It's like all the children have been let out to play and there's no one supervising them. And this is what the world has turned into. I'll try and wrap it up here, but also as well, it's about, you know, if you think about the structural adjustments in Africa and being tied to your debt, and then we saw through the 80s, individuals, you know, most people have got massive debt, and then we see, you know, the kind of nexus of exploitation to the point where now you've got, you know, a 20-year-old exploiting a 15-year-old, and it really is, you know, all of these things all get tied together, you know, and at the end of the day, we want equality, we want to fight racism, we want to end sexism, we want to have our human rights, we want to have a democracy that is functioning, you know, and like we just need to realize that we've got where we are today through deceit and through manipulation, and we have to wake up and call out what is wrong, and, you know, continue as we have been doing, many of us generationally for centuries, to just fight for our freedom, fight for our rights. And this bill is a restriction on that, justified in a way that is distorted and quite frankly disgusting.
Thank you, Lucy. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry that I'm shortening your
I'm done.
time.
It's fine.
Like I
Thank
said, I'm
you.
trying to
Thank you.
keep us moving. I've just summarized some of the key things that Lucy have just said that I absolutely think is important that we reflect on. The fact that this is about our humanity, that the fact we're citizens of a country, but we're human beings, regardless of our color, creed, whatever that we are, we're human beings, and we have human rights and basic liberties to have a voice and have an opinion, and that should not be something that those in power should be having any kind of restrictions at all. If we have a voice and we disagree with how things are, we should have the right to speak and to express ourselves. That should just be a given, something that doesn't even need to be spoken about. And also the fact that there are bigger things that we really need to be focused on: the climate disaster, the rise of capitalism, violence against women. All of these things are things that we need to be focusing on. And all these things should be what our government is focusing on, instead of making us worry and making us have these conversations to question laws that are kind of impacting our civil liberties. But this also creates a mistrust with the police and the government, and we should have a situation where our police, the purpose is to protect and to serve, and the government to govern and guide, create a rule of law that brings harmony and order, not self-serving laws that work specifically according to how they want society to be. I understand there is Tory party, there's Labour party, there's this party, there's that party, but at the end of the day, the overall harmony of wider society should be the main focus for the people who we vote to be in places of power, to be our voices that represent us. And that is one of the early reasons why this group was formed, to make sure that parties, especially our own, and the Labour Party first, is held accountable for how they govern us and how our leaders lead us. And if there are certain things that we think are not putting our equality, our sense of rights at the forefront, then we speak out, and we have to speak out, and that's what this space is. So I hope you can add your thoughts to this conversation as well. And last thing, because I'm very kind of, like I said, with the time, I want to kind of end on a positive note by giving message of how we want to conclude this. And some people, I was just looking at the WhatsApp text messages, and I've just gonna read this out to you. How's everyone, by the way? Are you all okay? We've been here for a while, but we're just coming to the end. Thank you so much for your patience and all of your amazing contributions so far. So I'm going to read something out to you, and I would love to know your thoughts, kind of hear from everyone as much as I can. Everyone is praising David Lammy's speech, but he was going to abstain until the public put pressure on him and other politicians over the weekend. Why is it important for the opposition to be united from the get-go? People like Diane Abbott, Afsana Begum, Zahra, surname is not there, I apologize, someone can add the surname, were vocal from the start, but others remained on the fence until the day of the vote. Is this the move of a career politician who's just looking for a social media trend? Or is this something that maybe the law had a purpose and they changed their mind at the end, and do they have the liberty to do so? Why is this not okay, or why is it okay? What message do we have for David Lammy and other politicians? What are your reactions to his speech? Have you heard it, by the way? Let's start with Maurice.
Look, I heard David's speech. I thought it was excellent. I thought there's one thing that I think we all know about David Lammy, is that when he wants to speak and bring passion He's very, very good at it. And yesterday was one of those days. I'm not really, I know this isn't necessarily what you want. I'm not really ready to be negative about David Lammy or really anyone on this tip, because at the end of the day, they voted against. That's what I wanted to happen. So I'm not gonna, it might be the case, and it might well be the case that they were talking about abstaining, then I would have had a lot to say, but they didn't. So rather than, I think if I'm gonna spend energy, it won't be on criticising what didn't happen with Labour. It's about criticising what did happen with the Conservatives. That's just me.
I like that. I like that. That's like a positive way of looking at it, because the negative energy takes away from the bigger picture. And looking at the bigger picture is the fact that, yes, maybe they were abstaining or something on this time, but right now, at the end of the day, this is what happened. And that speech was indeed powerful. But what does everyone else think? I see a hand up from Black Labour Socialists.
Yeah, I think that we can and we should be mindful of what we see our representatives not doing that we would like them to do. We can't expect our representatives to have the same mind as ourselves. So, that's okay as far as it goes. But we should be looking at that. We should be making our representatives feel that what they say is being looked at critically when it needs to be criticized. But I'm with Maurice to that extent that, people can have positions that are not helpful, are not helping, and they can change. They can see that the wind is blowing another way. They can say, look, actually, and they could actually, as a matter of conscience, say, hang on a second, I really should be doing a different thing now. I should be moving from saying, yes, let's abstain for whatever reasons, to hang on a second. Those arguments have been made. I've heard the power of those arguments, and I'm going to support, and I'm in a position, because I'm on the front bench, I'm in a position to actually give a stronger voice to those other voices. So, we should appreciate that. I guess the issue is we need to see consistency of that move from being a representative we might have questions about whether they've got their heart in the right place as to a previous track record, and you've done the right thing, and we want to see you doing more of that. Please continue. Yeah, and that'll be great. Let's I can get behind somebody who I wasn't as supportive of if they keep doing the right things. But if they're just chopping and changing, and the next day it's kind of backsliding to, well, this isn't convenient for me now, so I'll say something else. That'll be problematic. But that's part of our democratic process, though. We affect them, they affect us. We listen to what they're saying. They should be listening to what we're saying. And then over time, we arrive at the cohort of representatives who are really supportable, and they get the backing of the membership and then of the wider voting public. And some of them, what we want to see is the ones who really should last do last, and the ones who are never quite able to maintain a direction towards strong principles, they either realize they're in the wrong job and they gracefully choose to do something else in life, and they could do something great somewhere else, or we kind of as internal electors say we want this other person instead. But it doesn't need to be kind of horrible and kind of, it doesn't need to be aggressive and spiteful. It can be quite reasonable and thoughtful, and a process that's very democratic, and that's what we want to see.
Thank you you very much. I was just writing down some of the key things again, and that I thought really important to recap. Our representatives need to feel like their actions are being looked at, and we're holding them accountable to make sure that they are fulfilling the purpose of why we voted for them, to be the voice that represents us in Parliament, right? So yes, somebody can have their own personal perspective of how they see how they would like to respond to a particular bill, but if the voters are saying, actually, this is what we feel it should be happening, and that impacts their decision, then that can change. So interesting perspective. And the last thing that I really, really like, we want the opposition to have a strong voice that challenges the government and upheld the values and ethos of the Labour Party. As members of the Labour Party, councillors, activists, and people who believe in the values of the party, that is what the message for us, the hope is, instead of us criticizing. At the end of the day, the bigger picture was you voted against, but in future, unite from the beginning, basically, is what we're trying to say. I'm really mindful of the time, so I would like us to move from this point real quickly.
So, can I just come in on this point?
It was such a beautiful, calm way that I ended that. So I really hope it's not like a negative.
1 minute only. Give him a 1 minute limit. I'm counting from now.
Yeah. Yeah, go.
I'm not going now.
Lukman?
I'm not going. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Man. I didn't
on the chat. I like the teacher mode in Lucy. She's like keeping the times instructed. You've got only 1 minute. Write on the chat, because as I'm doing along, I will summarize any extra points as possible. But because we're way over the time, I'm trying to keep us summarized as much as possible. But thank you all so much for your contributions. Very, very useful. And this is not the end of the conversation. This is just the beginning of us having conversations, and our YouTube channel will have more content where these amazing speakers and more will be back to expand on some of the things that we said today and add more as well. So this is just touching on the surface, really. So there's more opportunities. Right, so the last thing that I would like us to, I'm just making sure that I keep all of my notes. Okay, so now we're going towards the ending part of, so what's next, right? That's the point of this. So the vote happened. What happens next? What happens next in the technical terms of the bill, first of all? Where is it now? What happens next? Anybody jump in?
I thought you were going to tell us. Sorry. So that was the second reading. So I'm assuming, Maurice, I don't know if you know the technicalities, but my understanding is that it will go back to the Lords, and then will it go back out into select committees for further discussion before it comes back down again? So the Lords can put in amendments, or they can, yeah, Maurice? I'm embarrassed, I'm a citizenship teacher. So it's not final yet. Yes, okay. It's not the last reading, and you know, I think there's actually the possibility that it can get bounced backward and forward. But I think it's really important that, you know, what happened with David is that he responded to what people were saying, and this is the whole point of why we're fighting to have our right to say, because, you know, if you're a good politician, you do listen and you are reflective of what public opinion is. And, you know, I'm sure we're all tired of hearing how many times the Tories say this is what the British nation wants. Like, they really think they've got their finger on the real pulse. So yeah, it should come back through. So in the meantime, we should be pressuring, we should be using alternative medias to discuss it, spreading the news, getting people to write to their MPs and sign petitions.
Okay, fantastic.
It's not royal assented yet.
Okay, Maurice, anything to add to that in terms of the technicality of where the bill is? Did Lucy cover it?
I would always bow to Lucy's knowledge on that. She teaches this stuff, to be honest.
Yeah.
But like she says, it's not over. It's not over until it's over, and even when it is over, we still campaign for it to be repealed. So, you know, it's not. There's not an end to this. It's just a continual battle, and at the moment we're pushing back against this nonsense.
I like that. I like that. Yes.
The bill is in the next stage is that the bill goes to committee, and it is examined in greater detail. So there is still the possibility that parts of it could be changed. The government could be asked to clarify, to review. So and that can come in a few weeks. But
Amazing.
So the thing to do is just to continue making a noise, continue being awkward, continue being an informed and responsible citizen, and expand Labour Black Socialists, the profile, the brand, the noise, and maybe David Lammy might become morally consistent.
That was brilliant.
Can I?
No, here. Sorry. The other thing I was going to say is like having some kind of ideological integrity, like be on the right side of history here.
Yep,
Really
I like that. I
important.
like that.
Yeah.
I like
Can
that.
I-
Look, I'm sorry you haven't spoken. Let me give you an opportunity.
The final point, the final thing on this bill is going to be is whatever the timescale is, it'll go through. Labour Party is going to get the blame for this, from the women, from all the people who are going to lose out, because they've come at it half-heartedly, and I'm not going to be diplomatic for the sake of it. They've come at it half-heartedly. The main fight about this bill is what happens after it's passed. Had they come at it right from the beginning with full heart to oppose it, they would have gone on opposing it. The problem with the Labour Party is that they're going to get a blame for it because half-heartedly means soon as it's passed, they're going to move on to something else, and they're going to forget about this. And people who are going to lose out of this are not going to forgive them. They've actually just taken on a huge part of this country, which is the women. And if they lose out of this, which they will, unable to do protests like the ones they had, that's a years to come issue. And the Labour Party is already getting blamed for it, for actually getting to this stage of not actually opposing it with its full heart. And for them to actually then shut up and move on to something else, never to discuss it again, people will remember that. And bills like this affect us every day, and it'll remind us that this bill exists. So I'm not going to be diplomatic.
Thank you.
The Labour Party is actually
Yeah.
completely made a hash of it, and they're going to get the blame for it more than the Tories, to be honest with you.
Yeah. But the Tories are at fault, and all of our energy needs to be to tell them you need to calm yourself and you need to not create laws that are causing, confusion, further divide, and attacking our people. And as members of the party, the best that we can do, as Maurice said eloquently earlier, instead of us focusing on what could have been, is to focus on what actually happened, and then together collect our voices to what could be next. And that's the part that I would like us to now end on, is what can we do now? Because again, it's not over until it's over. It's not over even after the bill becomes a bill. If that happens, we will always have a voice. For as long as we are breathing, as long as we are speaking, and as long as we are walking and able to move as human beings, we will always have the right to speak. And that is something that even if government tries, they can never take away from us. We in this room are legacies of people who literally had no right to vote, no right to exist, who were taken from their villages and homes and sold in trades. And we are not going to be the future of that legacy that are just going to sit by and accept things and just tweet about it, or just moan about it in group conversations and move on. No, we will, as Ridwan said earlier, make them uncomfortable and keep shouting, keep talking until we are heard. So that is the thing that I want to ask right now. Is at the amendment stage, right? If we had a message for our Labour voices in Parliament, as well as others who are listening to this, what particular parts of the bill do we want to be amended, that we think are seriously need to be amended? Give me one each. Ridwan, I'll start with you.
I will be short. The thing affecting the Gypsy, Roma, and traveler communities. That is a problem. The language concerning serious disruptions affecting ordinary people, and a voice that hasn't been heard, but our brother Luqman had raised, the trade unions. This is a serious problem for them. And lastly, I don't like home secretaries with unrestricted powers to pass little bits of notes that don't come to Parliament, under scrutiny at Parliament. So it is those things, but even if those things are attended to, this doesn't become a good bill. There are too many things in there.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So repeat the clause regarding the trade unions, the clause regarding the Gypsy, Roma, and traveler community. That is something that is really, really wrong, with the fact that somebody who sat down and wrote that clause that affects an entire group of people's way of life, that is something that we really should be concerned about and needs to be looked at. And the unrestricted powers that the Home Secretary is trying to give herself, somebody who's accused of being a bully and of various other things, that should concern all of us. Okay, so thank you for that, Ridwan. Maurice, anything to add? What particular clause that you think, if the powers that be are listening, should really be considered to be amended?
The whole bill should be scrapped. I'll save time. To be honest.
You're the one.
It's worth anything, so the whole bill should be scrapped.
Yes.
The whole bill. Okay. I like that. Like, see, I was just trying to find the diplomatic vote in the middle, but Maurice is like, nope, start from scratch. No way. I like that. Lucy, what about you? Are you on the same boat? Scrap the whole thing?
I think the whole thing should be scrapped.
Yeah.
The section came from the wrong place, but I think giving the discretion around the marches is a very dangerous precedent. And I agree with what Ridwan was saying, about the impact on particular communities. Like, have they equality assessed this law? And the emissions around what I'm assuming that this bill was prepared before last weekend, which is why it's missing. But there are serious emissions. But I think, scrap it, start again, and let's deal with re-educating young people and men and getting the rape convictions. As like the figures are just actually ridiculous. It's a much deeper malign in society that needs addressing than what this bill can do. This is just like putting a piece of tissue where you just got chopped with a machete.
Amazing. Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, so I just wrote down, to summarize, this bill sets a dangerous precedent. So the whole thing really, really needs to be looked at. And the question of, was the equality assessed? I really like that question, because one of our taglines here at the Black Labour Socialists is to fight for equality and fairness for all. So that's one of the things that we're holding you accountable, government, and asking you, before you make laws, ensure that equality is at the forefront of your purpose in why you're creating the certain law, and your focus on education and the conviction rates for crimes against women. There was a woman with a placard at the protest that said she reported a rape against a police officer and she was ignored. So that should be the person who you need to be making laws for, to protect, instead of giving more powers to the people that she's speaking about. So last point of, just to get Luqman, any amendments from you, or are you also on the whole thing?
No, I agree with Maurice. The whole thing should be scrapped. I can't think of one thing that's positive about it.
Amazing, thank you so much. And what about you, the Black Labour Socialist voice?
I think everything has been said that needs to be said. That the bill is bad, it should be scrapped. When we think that it will pass because of the nature of the majority of the government, we continue to point out what's wrong as it gets implemented. Whenever anything happens in light of the bill, we oppose that, we agitate for it to be eventually repealed. Yeah, that's how disposition should be. Just be on guard.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And just to summarize, correct me again, I'm going to say, so what's next? And what's some of the bullet points that we're suggesting for people who are listening, thinking, this was really good conversation, I want to do something, so what can I do? So good point, listen carefully. We cannot allow these powers to pass. Now is the time for us to come together, to stand up to this aggressive and egregious power grab. This is from the link that we're going to share with you from the Liberty Human Rights Campaign. And again, first place that you should be signing, right? So what can you do? Sign the petition above. Like I just said, the link will be part of this video. Share this video, listen very carefully, write down the knowledge that you're gaining, be informed. As Ridwan said, that power is education is very important, okay? Awareness is key. We need to arm ourselves with knowledge. Keep researching, keep learning, read the actual bill. I was asking everyone to come up with the specific amendments of specific sections, and Ridwan was reminding us of certain clauses that he is speaking about. That's important. Instead of using Twitter and Facebook and your auntie's WhatsApp as your source of knowledge, make sure that you actively read it yourself, that you understand what you're speaking against, because intelligence is the way that you will beat the powers that be that try to oppress us, right? Okay. Write to your MP. That is something that you can do. Let them know where you stand. Tag them on social media. If they're there, let them know where you stand. Let them know what your thoughts are, and make sure that they're representing you, okay? And they might not want us to protest in person, but we are on social media, okay? Even us as individuals, as well as the Black Labour Socialists is on Twitter. Make sure you follow us, tweet, learn from the things that we're saying, and make sure you use your social media platforms as well, not just to take pictures of what you've eaten, but also to express yourself. That's very important. So the last thing, final words from us, and the Labour Black Socialists stands in solidarity and with Labour, Roma, Gypsy traveller community, helping to oppose the very specific draconian impact of this bill on all the people that it has impacted, let alone the disgrace assault on basic human rights, freedom of assembly and freedom of expression in the bill. More importantly, our message to you tonight is this: never give up hope. Try to be as positive as possible. I know it's very hard. Every time you click on the news, there's only darkness, despair, and just chaos on social media as well. But having spaces like this, listening to conversations like this is very important, because you're informed, but at the same time, there's a sense of hope. And that is what we're here to do, to give ourselves and you that mental health pause that says it's not all doom and gloom, that we have a voice and we can speak up. Use your voice, speak up, whether it's social media, in person, talking to your network, talking to your colleagues, talking to your family. Keep talking, never stop talking. That is the most important thing. And yeah, you have a voice, use it. You can reach us and through social media. The Black Labour Socialists is straightforward as it is. And we're on Instagram as well. And you can also reach out to us on email, which will be on the link of this video. But make sure you're also getting connected to mental health support services. All of it gets a bit too much, that you're okay shouldering all the chaos of the world around us on our own. You're not alone. We're not alone. We are a voice, we are unity and solidarity for every single person who's listening. Thank you from me, and to our final points from our speakers, just to conclude. Thank you all so much. And Ridwan, any last points from you?
I think my brother Maurice needs a break. He is so tired.
I know. I
We
can
need,
see that.
we need him and my sister there, Lucy. The two of them are probably the most tired people here. They need to sleep. Tomorrow is another day. My brother Lukman and myself, we have a more flexible schedule. But the two of them are tired. I can see it.
Heroes,
go and sleep.
heroes.
This is a caravan of love, and we must remind one another that when we see some of us taking strain, we must remind them to take care of themselves. And these two need to go and sleep.
I agree. And we're going to conclude in a
I
second.
wish.
Just to close up, any final thoughts from you? And massive thank you for your contribution tonight.
Did you say Lucy?
Maurice, sorry, and then I'll come to Lucy.
No, genuinely, I think we've said everything. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. We've
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Lucy.
Unconjusted, peace, love, and unity, solidarity. Good night, sweet dreams.
Thanks. Amazing. Lukman.
Good night. Not much more.
Amazing. I love that. And our Black Labour Socialist voice. Any last thoughts?
Yes, as to what everyone said, get some rest. There's more to be done tomorrow. And thank you so much for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
It's been really good, everybody.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We're going to stop recording now, but we're all going to wave as the recording stops to say thank you, bye-bye, and good night, everybody. We're just waiting. Then we're going to conclude. Thank you for listening. Until the recording stops, I'll just keep talking to say thank you. I hope you're okay. Hope your family's okay. We're still recording, so I'm just going to say, how's life?
No.